Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
That rainy Tuesday night in Chicago, when the boss called me into his glass-walled office overlooking the churning loop traffic and slid the pink slip across his polished desk like it was nothing more than yesterday's forgotten memo amid the stacks of quarterly reports we had all slaved over for months. I did not break down in tears or beg for reconsideration, as some of my colleagues might have done in similar boardroom executions, but instead I simply nodded with a composure forged from two decades of navigating corporate minefields, grabbed my wool coat from the back of the chair where it had absorbed the faint scent of the coffee we shared during strategy sessions, and walked out into the downpour that seemed to mirror the sudden washout of my professional identity. Driving straight through the slick streets to my dad's modest bungalow in the old working-class neighborhood, where he had raised me after Mom's passing from that long illness nobody talked about anymore. I figured family would anchor me after all those years of grinding through promotions and deadlines, sharing stories of my successes at his VFW gatherings where the men swapped tales of factory shifts and union wins. But as I stood on his sagging porch shaking off the rain from my sensible pumps and knocking with knuckles still chilled from gripping the steering wheel, Dad, Robert Thompson, the sturdy auto worker whose calloused hands had taught me to bait a hook for Lake Michigan perch during those rare father-daughter weekends, opened the door just enough to peer out with eyes narrowed in disappointment, hissing through gritted teeth that failures like me had no place in his home anymore. Especially not when his own pension checks were shrinking with every round of federal cuts to the industries that had built the city. He did not invite me in for a cup of the strong black coffee he brewed every morning or even offer a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, but instead thrust a cardboard box at me for whatever personal items I might have left there over the years, closing the door with a finality that echoed louder than the thunder rolling in from the west, leaving me to load it into my old Honda amid the growing puddle at my feet and wonder how the man who had once bragged about my corner office now viewed me as dead weight dragging down his fragile retirement. From there, I navigated the familiar route back to our split-level house on the quiet cul-de-sac in Naperville, the kind of suburban haven we had purchased together back when flip phones were the height of technology and our dreams of stability seemed as solid as the foundation we had inspected during that home show excursion to Rosemont where we picked out the kitchen tiles that now gleamed under the porch light, hoping against the knot in my stomach that Mark, my husband of 18 years and the smooth-talking car salesman who could close a deal on a minivan to a family of 6 with nothing but charm and a firm handshake, had received my frantic text about the layoff and was inside pacing the living room with concern etched on his face, ready to pull me into one of those enveloping bear hugs he reserved for the end of tense Bears games or after a tough sales quarter. Yet as I pulled into the driveway slick with runoff from the gutters we had cleaned just last fall, his pickup truck sat prominently under the carport with its bumper sticker from the dealership fading in the headlights, and through the rain-streaked windows I glimpsed movement in the living room that did not match the solitary figure I had envisioned. So I hurried up the steps key in hand, pushing open the front door to the scent of takeout Chinese mingling with the faint cologne he wore for client lunches, only to find him methodically packing a duffel bag on the coffee table cluttered with remote controls and unread mail, while Tina, that perky younger colleague from his office with the highlighted hair and the laugh that always seemed a touch too rehearsed at company picnics, lounged on our leather couch as if she were already the undisputed mistress of the domain, her legs crossed in those form-fitting jeans that whispered promises of midlife reinvention to men like Mark who chase the illusion of youth to outrun their own creeping doubts. Mark did not even bother to turn around fully at the sound of the door clicking shut behind me, his focus remaining on zipping the bag with deliberate pulls that spoke of premeditation rather than the spur-of-the-moment regret I might have hoped for. And when he finally spoke it was with that oily undertone he deployed so effectively on hesitant buyers at the lot, declaring that it was all over between us, and had been for longer than I probably realized, especially now that my job had vanished and left me without the steady paycheck that had apparently been propping up his version of our life together. His words landing like additional blows after the severance package that offered only 2 months' buffer against the mortgage payments and utility bills stacking up in the drawer by the fridge. Tina smirked from her perch, twirling a strand of that carefully styled hair around her finger in a gesture that carried all the smugness of someone who believed she had upgraded her circumstances. Without considering the foundations she was stepping over, and Mark at last pivoted to face me directly, his eyes holding a cold detachment colder than the wind whipping off Lake Michigan during winter storms, labeling me a drag on his ambitions and insisting it was time to cut ties cleanly before things turned uglier. His voice laced with the kind of finality that brooked no argument or plea for dialogue about the shared mortgage or the joint accounts we had nurtured through lean years and unexpected windfalls. Then came the moment that seared itself into my memory more sharply than any corporate dismissal, as he worked up a glob of disdain and spat it onto the kitchen tile floor we had selected together during that same home show outing. The wet splatter landing perilously close to the toe of my pump and symbolizing the utter contempt he harbored for the woman who had stood by him through dealership slumps and family holidays, before he snatched Tina's hand in his and they brushed past me toward the door without a backward glance or even the courtesy of a slammed exit, leaving the house echoing with the sudden void of their departure and the relentless patter of rain against the windows that now felt like accusatory fingers tapping at my resolve. I did not dissolve into sobs on the spot or chase after them into the storm with desperate shouts that would only amplify my humiliation in the eyes of nosy neighbors who might peer through their blinds. But instead, I moved with a mechanical efficiency born of too many crisis management meetings, retrieving a heavy-duty trash bag from the cabinet under the sink where we kept the cleaning supplies for those weekend deep cleans that Mark always managed to dodge with excuses about overtime, and began filling it with the essentials that represented the fragments of my life I could salvage: folded clothes from the dresser we had shared, my laptop still warm from the day's futile emails, a handful of framed photos from our wedding on that crisp autumn day in the suburbs where vows had seemed eternal, now appearing as ironic relics of misplaced trust amid the gathering shadows of betrayal. My phone vibrated insistently in my pocket with a text from Dad confirming what his earlier rejection had implied, reiterating that I should not bother returning to his place since he could not afford to carry the burden of my setbacks on top of his own tightening finances from those pension reductions that hit retirees like him hardest in a city still reeling from manufacturing declines. So I tossed the box he had given me into the bag as well, its contents a mix of childhood mementos and forgotten holiday ornaments that now carried the weight of familial disownment, and loaded everything into the Honda's trunk before sliding behind the wheel once more, the engine turning over with a reluctant growl that matched the turmoil churning in my chest as I pointed the car toward a nondescript motel off the interstate where the neon sign flickered promises of hourly rates and anonymity for travelers like me adrift in the night. Checking into that dimly lit front desk with the last crumpled $20 bill from my wallet and some loose change rattling in the cup holder, I accepted the key to a room at the end of the row where the hum of idling semis provided a constant underscore to the isolation settling over me like the musty bedspread on the lumpy mattress. And as I lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling patterned with cracks that resembled the fractures in my former life, I pulled out my phone not to scroll through contacts for sympathy calls that would likely yield only awkward silences, but to open the private banking application tied to the limited liability company I had established a decade earlier following a substantial bonus from a high-stakes ad campaign I had spearheaded without fanfare or shared celebrations. The one where rents from a portfolio of properties stretching from sun-baked Phoenix developments to humid Orlando townhomes continued to accumulate steadily, pushing quarterly totals well beyond six figures in passive income that had allowed me to weather market dips and personal stresses without ever burdening Mark or Dad with the details of my financial independence. There too was the alert for the yacht, that sleek 60-foot vessel christened Silent Wave and moored in a discreet marina near Milwaukee under layers of shell entities designed to shield it from prying eyes. Its upkeep automatically deducted and charters generating additional revenue during the seasons when I could not escape for solitary sails on weekends that Mark dismissed as mere book club outings with the neighborhood wives. They had all pegged me as the reliable corporate drone scraping by on a salary that barely covered the facade of middle-class comfort, the dutiful wife and daughter who prioritized stability over ambition. But in truth, I had constructed this hidden empire through late-night research on foreclosures during the housing crash and calculated risks that paid off in deeds and dividends, assets that could reshape my trajectory if I chose to unleash them rather than let the dismissals define my end. As the motel's thin walls transmitted the distant rumble of another truck shifting gears into the darkness, a nascent plan began to form in my mind, not as an explosive outburst of rage that might invite legal repercussions or further scorn, but as something more precise and enduring, like the slow-building swell of a lake storm. And I composed a discreet text to an old colleague from my early ad days who still owed me for covering a critical pitch back in the 90s when we were both hungry juniors clawing for recognition, requesting information on Mark's current movements and professional entanglements without specifying the why behind my inquiry. Her immediate affirmative response flickering on the screen like a promise of alliance in the shadows. Because true reckoning, I mused with a dry amusement at the irony of their underestimation, commences not with noise but with the quiet gathering of intelligence on where one's adversaries lay their heads at night, yet just as sleep tugged at the edges of my exhaustion. The phone illuminated once more with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number bearing Dad's local area code, its insistent ring slicing through the quiet and leaving me to ponder what fresh twist of need or remorse might prompt him to reach out so soon after casting me adrift. Answering Dad's unexpected call from that unfamiliar number on the third persistent ring, while sprawled across the motel's unforgiving mattress, with its springs creaking under every subtle shift in my position, brought a mix of wariness and reluctant curiosity flooding through me as the digital display confirmed it originated from the same local exchange that had dialed his rejections into my life just hours earlier, his voice emerging gruff, yet threaded with an uncharacteristic hesitation that suggested the night's solitude had perhaps chipped away at the rigid facade of independence he so prized, admitting in a roundabout way that his earlier harshness might have been overly influenced by the sting of his own financial pressures from those relentless pension reductions hitting the auto industry retirees like waves eroding the Lake Michigan shoreline where we had once shared those quiet fishing outings. He framed the invitation to meet at the familiar corner diner near his bungalow as a chance for calmer discussion about my predicament without delving into outright apologies that his pride would never fully allow, mentioning offhand that Mark had reached out with tales of my sudden homelessness that painted me in even dimmer lights than Dad's initial dismissal. And though part of me wanted to hang up and let the silence punish him further for the ease with which he had discarded his only daughter after a lifetime of unspoken expectations, I agreed to the rendezvous the following morning because testing the boundaries of his remorse could reveal whether any genuine support lurked beneath the surface or if this was merely a ploy to extract help for his mounting bills. Driving away from the motel at dawn with the trash bag of belongings secured in the passenger seat and the first hints of sunrise glinting off the dew-kissed highways that carried me back into the heart of the city where memories of better days intertwined with the fresh wounds of abandonment. Arriving at the diner with its vinyl booths worn smooth from decades of shift workers nursing coffees through pre-dawn hours, I slid into the seat across from Dad, who already poked at a plate of runny eggs and hash browns with the fork he had gripped like a tool from his shop days, his eyes avoiding direct contact as he muttered questions about my immediate plans in the wake of the job loss and marital implosion that had left me unmoored in a way that echoed the uncertainties of his own post-retirement existence, the air between us thick with the aroma of sizzling bacon and the low hum of conversations from truckers debating fuel prices at the counter. I kept my responses measured and vague, stirring my black coffee without revealing the steady stream of rental income funneling into my private accounts from those 7 properties scattered across sun-drenched southwestern developments and bustling Florida enclaves that I had acquired through meticulous foreclosures during the economic downturn when others panicked and sold low, assets that continued to generate wealth autonomously without the need for my daily oversight or the knowledge of family members who viewed my career as a precarious ladder rather than a foundation for broader financial strategies. When he finally broached the subject of his own strains by sliding a crumpled envelope of overdue bills across the Formica tabletop, Reminders of car repairs and utility hikes that gnawed at fixed incomes in neighborhoods like his where the cost of living crept upward while wages stagnated. I felt that familiar tug of obligation warring with the fresh betrayal. Pocketing the envelope unopened with a non-committal promise to see what assistance I could muster, and as we parted with an awkward handshake that lacked the warmth of our past interactions, a wry amusement bubbled up inside me at the swift transformation of failure into potential benefactor in his eyes, a dynamic all too common among the blue-collar patriarchs of our generation who preached self-reliance until their own nets came up empty, leaving me to drive onward with a clearer resolve to leverage my hidden resources without handing over the reins to those who had so readily cast me aside. Returning to the motel briefly to freshen up and secure my laptop against the prying eyes of housekeeping staff who might wander through unattended rooms, I arranged to meet Lisa in the parking lot shaded by the overhanging branches of oaks that line the interstate access road. My old colleague from the cutthroat advertising sales trenches where we had forged an unlikely alliance during those early 90s campaigns that demanded late nights and sharper instincts to outmaneuver competitors vying for the same corporate dollars. She arrived in her sleek hybrid sedan looking every bit the independent consultant she had become after ditching the 9-to-5 grind for flexible gigs that paid better without the soul-crushing hierarchies. Handing over a manila folder stuffed with printouts that detailed Mark's hasty relocation to a downtown condo leased under Tina's name to dodge immediate alimony entanglements, complete with bank transfer records showing him siphoning funds from our joint account and even intercepted texts that exposed his strategy of spinning my layoff into sympathy narratives to boost sales commissions at the dealership, where managers prized personal stories as much as vehicle specs. The real twist emerged as she leaned in closer amid the idling engines of passing rigs, confiding that my name had surfaced in a preliminary real estate inquiry launched by Mark's attorney, who seemed to be casting a wide net for any undisclosed holdings that could complicate the divorce proceedings. A development that sent a chill racing down my spine because I had layered those protections meticulously with trusts nested like Russian dolls to evade exactly this kind of opportunistic dredging. Wondering if a stray email trail or an offhand comment during one of our tax seasons had provided the breadcrumb leading them toward my carefully concealed empire. Thanking Lisa profusely and slipping her a generous check drawn from my secret reserves to cement her discretion and ongoing vigilance, I retreated to a nearby coffee shop boasting reliable Wi-Fi and sufficient privacy behind its potted plants to initiate the first tangible step in reclaiming control. Logging into the property management dashboard where I authorized the discreet sale of a single condominium unit in Tampa that had appreciated steadily since acquisition. The transaction promising to net around $50,000 after broker fees and taxes, funds that would serve as immediate leverage, without alerting the broader financial ecosystem to my maneuvers. With the liquidation process underway and confirmation emails pinging softly against the ambient chatter of baristas calling orders, I channeled a portion of the anticipated proceeds into retaining a private investigator specializing in the tangled webs of Midwestern divorces where emotions ran as high as the legal fees, instructing him via encrypted message to monitor Mark and Tina's daily routines with photographic evidence and location pings that could substantiate claims of dissipation in court if needed, the setup feeling like arming myself with invisible sentinels in a battle where visibility meant vulnerability. Emboldened by this groundwork, I turned to the initial threat of revenge not as a blaze of confrontation that might rebound against me, but as a subtle undercurrent designed to erode Mark's facade of invincibility. Dialing an old vendor contact from his dealership days who harbored a grudge over an unpaid promotional invoice from years back when Mark had played the big shot during a slow quarter, coaxing her into orchestrating a cascade of anonymous one-star reviews across online platforms that targeted the specific models he pushed hardest. The kind of digital sabotage that would trickle into customer hesitations and managerial scrutiny without tracing back to my hand. As she chuckled over the line about settling old scores with interest, I could not suppress a quiet laugh at the poetic justice of it all, imagining Mark's polished pitch faltering under the weight of fabricated complaints about pushy sales tactics. that mirrored his personal betrayals, a light-hearted vulgarity creeping into my thoughts as I pictured him sweating like a low-rent hustler caught in his own con, the satisfaction deriving from the clever inversion of his strengths into liabilities. Without descending into the crude outbursts he might expect from a scorned wife. By late afternoon, having upgraded to a more comfortable Airbnb rental overlooking a serene lake on the city's edge, where the water's gentle lap against the shore offered a meditative contrast to the inner turmoil, I uncorked a bottle of inexpensive Merlot to toast this tentative reclamation and scrolled through the investigator's preliminary dossier that captured Mark and Tina in a heated exchange outside a dimly lit bar, her gestures animated with frustration over some undisclosed strain that hinted at cracks already forming in their opportunistic union. The progress felt empowering yet laced with the persistent uncertainty of what deeper secrets they might unearth. But just as I savored the warmth spreading through me from the wine's modest depth, my phone jolted alive with an incoming call from Mark himself, his number flashing insistently and his voice, when I hesitated before answering, emerging thick and unsteady as if lubricated by several rounds at that same bar, pleading for a conversation because things were not unfolding as he had anticipated in the wake of his dramatic departure. The suspicious undertone in his words leaving me to wonder exactly what new information or desperation had prompted this olive branch extended into the gathering dusk. Mark's call lingered in the charged air of the Airbnb like the aftertaste of that Merlot I had sipped while reviewing the investigator's initial captures of his unraveling evening with Tina outside the bar where neon signs cast erratic shadows on their animated dispute. But rather than yield to the impulse to engage and risk unraveling my composure under his slurred entreaties about unresolved matters that undoubtedly masked his growing discomfort with the fallout from his hasty exodus, I allowed the voicemail to accumulate his fragmented pleas without interruption, his voice trailing off into assurances that circumstances had shifted in ways he had not foreseen when he spat on our kitchen floor and stormed out with his opportunistic companion. A development that only deepened the well of suspicion regarding what specific pressures might be compelling him to extend this tentative lifeline amid the encroaching realities of his choices. Redirecting my focus to the more pressing architecture of my concealed financial fortress, I set out the following morning under a sky heavy with the promise of lingering autumn clouds toward one of my unassuming properties in a quiet suburb on the city's fringe. A duplex that housed a young professional couple whose reliable rent payments had contributed steadily to the portfolio's resilience through market fluctuations and personal upheavals alike, arriving at the address where the manager, a pragmatic woman named Carla with a no-nonsense bob haircut and a clipboard perpetually in hand, greeted me at the curb with a raised eyebrow that conveyed her surprise at the physical presence of the owner she had communicated with solely through emails and automated portals for the better part of 5 years. As we toured the units together, navigating the freshly vacuumed hallways and peering into kitchens equipped with the stainless steel appliances I had specified during renovations to maximize tenant appeal, I absorbed the tangible solidity of these walls that embodied every calculated investment I had made in the shadows of my corporate role and marital routines. Structures that generated income without fanfare or the oversight of family members who dismissed my professional grind as a treadmill rather than a launchpad for enduring security. And in that moment of quiet inspection, I directed Carla to prepare listings for 2 additional units within the network, properties in stable neighborhoods that could be offloaded discreetly through a trusted broker who specialized in anonymous transactions for clients valuing privacy above spectacle. Anticipating that the influx of capital would fortify my position against the legal currents Mark's attorney appeared to be stirring based on Lisa's earlier warnings. Midway through the walkthrough, as Carla detailed minor maintenance logs with the efficiency of someone who treated properties like extensions of her own domain, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad that pierced the momentary sense of control I had cultivated amid the scent of fresh paint and the distant hum of lawnmowers in adjacent yards. His message inquiring pointedly about the anonymous funds that had mysteriously covered one of his pressing bills and pressing for clarification on the Sender's identity in a tone that blended gratitude with the underlying frustration of a man unaccustomed to receiving aid without strings or explanations. A communication that reignited the internal dilemma of whether to extend further olive branches to the father who had so swiftly revoked his support, or to allow the consequences of his dismissals to teach the lessons his pride resisted. The audience observing this internal tug-of-war might question the hardness of my stance, viewing it as an overreach into punitive territory when familial bonds deserved at least a measure of leniency after decades of shared history marked by mom's absence and the quiet endurance of single-parent challenges. Yet the memory of his hissed rejection on that rain-lashed porch fortified my resolve to prioritize self-preservation over reconciliation that could expose vulnerabilities anew. So I composed a brief acknowledgement without commitment and pocketed the device to refocus on Carla's updates, her insights into tenant turnover rates, providing a grounding rhythm that contrasted the emotional undercurrents swirling from Dad's outreach. That afternoon, back in the Airbnb with its lake view now shrouded in gathering mist, the first significant twist materialized through an urgent call from Lisa, whose voice carried the edge of someone who had just unearthed a complication in the intricate web of my safeguards, alerting me that inquiries had surfaced at the Milwaukee Marina regarding the silent wave, not from official channels, but from individuals whose probing questions about ownership and charter history evoked the scent of an amateurish fishing expedition likely tied to Mark's divorce maneuvers. A revelation that quickened my pulse, because the yacht had served as my private sanctuary for contemplative sails during weekends when Mark attributed my absences to innocuous social gatherings. Its revenue from discreet bookings adding another layer to the passive wealth stream I had nurtured away from prying familial eyes. Hastening to mitigate the risk, I accessed the management portal on my laptop and executed a swift transfer of title to an even more obscured trust layered with international elements to further insulate it from domestic scrutiny, simultaneously booking a personal charter for the coming weekend as a pretext to inspect the vessel firsthand and ensure no loose ends lingered in the cruise logs or visitor manifests that might betray the extent of my involvement. Yet before the adrenaline from that defensive pivot could fully subside, Carla reached out via email with an unsolicited tip that elevated her from mere employee to potential ally in this unfolding saga, informing me that whispers of my ex-husband's disparagement had circulated among a few tenants in the network. Fabricated tales of unreliability in property dealings designed to undermine my reputation if word spread to prospective renters, and offering to counter with eviction proceedings laced with pointed references that would tarnish Mark's credibility should he attempt to encroach on the rental market for his own gain. Her proactive stance laced with a subtle wit that promised to turn his meddling into a boomerang of professional setbacks without requiring my direct intervention. As the day waned into evening with the lake's surface rippling under intermittent gusts that mirrored the uncertainties eddying in my thoughts, I grappled with the dilemma posed by Dad's escalating needs. His follow-up texts detailing the shop's worsening prospects under Vic's strained leadership, where hours were being slashed to bare bones amid rumors of financial irregularities that could cascade into closures affecting not just his supplemental income, but the camaraderie he clung to in retirement, weighing whether a targeted intervention might redeem some fragment of our bond or merely invite further entanglements that diluted my focus on the broader revenge. Opting for the measured approach that balanced retribution with restraint, I arranged an anonymous wire transfer sufficient to cover another critical bill, enclosing a typed note through a courier service that read simply, "From a friend, no further inquiries," a gesture calculated to provide relief while underscoring the boundaries of my involvement and injecting a touch of ironic humor into the transaction as I envisioned his puzzlement over the source, mirroring the confusion he had sown in my life. The light vulgarity of the situation amusing me in its depiction of patriarchal figures reduced to decoding benevolence from shadows. Settling onto the balcony as twilight deepened, a glass of herbal tea steaming in my hands to steady the lingering tension. The investigators' latest update arrived via secure link with attachments that chronicled Mark's midday visit to a lawyer's office clutching sheaves of documents, and followed by a grainy image of him rummaging through the remnants of my old desk drawer in our former home. The implications of that discovery hanging like an unspoken threat and propelling me to question precisely what artifact from our shared past he had unearthed that might propel his pursuit into more dangerous waters. Gazing at that grainy image captured by the investigator of Mark hunched over the remnants of my old desk drawer in the dim light of our former home, where shadows from the overhead fixture danced across his furrowed brow and the scattered papers that represented fragments of our intertwined history, I experienced a visceral tightening in my chest that blended the raw uncertainty of exposure with the simmering resolve to transform this intrusion into another pivot point in the escalating narrative of my reclamation. The photo's timestamp indicating a late-night foray that suggested his desperation had escalated beyond casual curiosity into deliberate scavenging for ammunition in the legal arsenal he was assembling against me. Rather than allow the discovery to paralyze my momentum, I pivoted immediately toward proactive defense by scheduling an urgent consultation with Gloria, my steadfast attorney whose office in the bustling Loop District overlooked the Chicago River's ceaseless flow, and whose walls lined with leather-bound tomes on asset protection spoke to her expertise in shielding the quietly amassed fortunes of professionals like me who navigated high-stakes personal upheavals, arriving there through the midday congestion of taxis and pedestrians to find her already poring over preliminary filings with the intensity of a surgeon prepping for a delicate procedure. She laid out the summons with clinical precision, explaining that Mark had initiated formal divorce proceedings predicated on allegations of concealed marital assets that could encompass not only the properties, but potentially the yacht if connections were drawn through overlooked financial threads. Her questions probing the origins of his leads, perhaps a forgotten receipt from a marina visit tucked among tax documents or an inadvertent mention during one of our routine financial reviews that he had filed away for future leverage, while assuring me that our layered trusts provided a formidable bulwark. Though the process would demand resources and revelations that tested even the most fortified privacy. Nodding through the details as the river traffic honked faintly below, I authorized the countersuit with funds freshly wired from the Tampa liquidation that now swelled my liquid reserves toward $100,000. The transaction evoking a thrill of agency amid the dread of courts, dissecting the very independence I had cultivated in secrecy. Yet the growing conflict underscored the precarious balance between unleashing my full portfolio to crush his claims outright and maintaining the strategic ambiguity that kept adversaries guessing about the depth of my resources. That fragile equilibrium shattered later that week when Dad's battered pickup rumbled into the Airbnb's lot unannounced, its engine coughing to a halt as he emerged with the determined stride of a man confronting ghosts from his shop floor days. His knock at the door carrying the weight of unresolved tensions that had simmered since our diner encounter where his probing about the anonymous aide had gone unanswered in my efforts to preserve boundaries. Inviting him inside with a measured politeness that masked the internal churn of emotions tied to our fractured lineage, I poured coffee into mismatched mugs overlooking the lake's placid expanse now dotted with autumn leaves drifting like discarded intentions. And as he settled into the armchair with creaks protesting his bulk, he confronted the elephant directly by producing the note from the latest transfer and demanding to know if I stood behind the shadowy benevolence that had eased his immediate burdens while stoking his suspicions about the scale of my hidden capabilities. His lined face, etched from years under vehicle hoods and the relentless grind of providing after Mom's early departure, pleaded for transparency in a voice laced with the defensiveness of someone whose blue-collar ethos viewed secrecy as a betrayal akin to the union busts that had hollowed out his world. Yet the recollection of his porch-side dismissal fueled my candid response that the properties existed as fruits of my solitary labors during the housing crisis when he dismissed my ambitions as fanciful distractions from stable employment, a revelation that crumpled his features into a mosaic of regret and lingering pride that wrestled for dominance in his expressions. Steering the conversation toward his shop's deteriorating state under Vic's faltering management, where slashed hours threatened not just his pocketbook, but the social fabric he relied on in retirement, I introduced the twist with casual precision by alluding to Vic's entanglement in tax discrepancies that an anonymous tip to the authorities carefully worded to highlight irregularities without implicating innocence, had set in motion. Watching as Dad's eyes widened in realization that my reach extended into the undercurrents of his daily existence, his protest dying on lips that formed accusations I preempted with a thin smile, remarking that karma navigated like a well-crewed vessel. Smooth until the squalls revealed structural weaknesses, the ironic humor in his sputtering retort about uppity daughters meddling in men's business, providing a light vulgarity that underscored the reversal of roles he had never anticipated. Further complicating the web of alliances and animosities, Tina inserted herself into the fray with a call from a blocked number that pierced the afternoon quiet, her voice adopting a veneer of contrition as she described Mark's mounting disarray in the wake of their impulsive relocation and implored me to intervene for the sake of what she termed old acquaintances buried under layers of misunderstanding. Though the investigators' logs painted a picture of her extravagances on shared credit, lines that bordered on the audacious for someone positioning herself as the victim in their narrative. Playing along with feigned openness, I proposed a neutral lunch to discuss asset divisions that might alleviate their strains, only to orchestrate a cancellation through a fabricated reservation error at an upscale bistro where the staff recognized me from past networking events, the resulting no-show fees debiting their overextended cards and amplifying the humiliation as word rippled through their social orbit of Mark's inability to deliver even basic reliability. Meanwhile, the yacht emerged as the linchpin in my escalating strategy. Its transfer to the fortified trust completed seamlessly while I arranged a high-profile charter for an upcoming corporate retreat that promised $20,000 in fees to bolster liquidity, yet I claimed a stormy evening slot for personal use, anchoring the silent wave offshore to deliberate amid the rocking swells on whether to accelerate the exposure in depositions for a decisive victory or prolong the suspense that eroded their confidence incrementally, a dilemma that might draw viewer disapproval for its calculated cruelty in withholding closure from those entangled in the mess they had initiated. Though the satisfaction derived from witnessing their greed curdle into desperation lent a wry amusement to the proceedings as I envisioned Mark's salesman patter faltering under the weight of unpaid tabs like a lowlife exposed in his own inflated claims. As the week culminated in a flurry of legal notices and whispered updates from Carla about tenant murmurs quelled through her deft interventions, the conflicts reached a feverish pitch with Gloria's alert about an impending deposition where Mark's counsel would press for disclosures on offshore elements that skirted too close to the yacht's international shielding, prompting me to refine my testimony with her guidance while leaking selective details to a tabloid contact about the affairs. Indiscretions in a manner that avoided direct libel, but sowed doubt among his dealership superiors, the resulting dip in his sales projections adding another layer to the unraveling tapestry. Retiring to the balcony with a glass of wine that caught the fading light, I reviewed the investigators' video of Mark and Tina's public spat, her luggage in tow signaling fissures widening under pressure. A tableau that elicited a quiet chuckle at the folly of their union built on sand, yet the progress felt bittersweet against the isolation it imposed. Then Dad's call shattered the reverie, his tone fractured as he described the shop's imminent closure under the audit's shadow and beseeched my direct aid in navigating the fallout. The police suspending my deliberations just as Gloria entered with explosive news that Mark had unearthed a pivotal document from the desk raid, one capable of piercing the veil of my protections if leveraged aggressively in the forthcoming hearing. Gloria's revelation about the pivotal document unearthed in Mark's nocturnal raid on the desk drawer landed with the force of a sudden squall, disrupting the silent wave's steady charter preparations. That fated partnership agreement from my inaugural property flip during the early days of our marriage, when we had pooled modest savings in a gesture of shared optimism, now twisted in his narrative to imply joint claims on the sprawling portfolio I had since fortified through individual acumen and unshared risks. Her voice steady in the office as she outlined how his attorney brandished it like a skeleton key to unlock alimony windfalls and asset divisions that threatened to dismantle the independence I had painstakingly constructed amid the distractions of corporate deadlines and familial expectations. The uncertainty crested into a torrent of strategic recalibration as I absorbed the implications during the drive back to the Airbnb where the lake's surface churned under gathering winds. That echoed the internal gale of weather to preempt the deposition with a preemptive disclosure of my full holdings to eviscerate his leverage or to layer additional obfuscations through Gloria's network of offshore consultants who specialized in rerouting titles for clients entangled in acrimonious splits, ultimately greenlighting the countersuit that unleashed a barrage of evidence documenting his infidelity's financial toll and the unauthorized drains on our joint resources, the legal machinery grinding forward with the inexorability of Chicago's winter traffic while I funneled more from the property sales into the fray, feeling the thrill of combat mingle with the dread that victory might exact a solitude deeper than the betrayals that had propelled me here. Addressing Dad's fracturing world took precedence in the days leading to the hearing, his daily voicemails painting a portrait of the shop's collapse under the audit's unyielding scrutiny, where Vic's corner cutting had exposed a web of irregularities that shuttered the doors and scattered the crew into unemployment lines that mirrored my own recent descent. His pleas evolving from gruff demands to raw admissions of regret for the porchside banishment that had severed our tether when I needed it most. Meeting him once more at the diner where the booths now seemed to sag under the weight of accumulated disappointments, I chose partial candor over total evasion by confirming the property's existence as the byproduct of my covert maneuvers during the recession when his skepticism about women's roles in finance had kept him oblivious to my portfolio's growth. Watching his features contort through phases of shock, contrition, and a defensive pride that resurfaced in mutterings about hidden fortunes undermining family trust, yet the emotional core of the exchange hinged on my extension of a check covering his mortgage arrears with explicit conditions attached, no collusion with Mark's inquiries, and a cessation of judgments on my autonomy. Terms that forced him to confront the reciprocity he had withheld, his reluctant acceptance accompanied by a tentative embrace that recalled the fishing trips, but laced with the bitterness of lessons learned too late, a gesture the audience might decry as overly conditional when paternal bonds warranted unconditional grace, though the wry humor in his grumbled aside about damn cell-made women appending the old order infused the moment with a light vulgarity that highlighted the ironic appending of his worldview without descending into outright hostility. Mark's trajectory plummeted in tandem with the legal tides, the tabloid insinuations about his affair metastasizing into dealership gossip that demoted him from showroom frontrunner to overlooked lot attendant fielding complaints on repossessed vehicles, while Tina's departure amid the credit debacles left him isolated in the downtown condo whose lease teetered on eviction notices she had abandoned him to handle alone, the investigators' feeds capturing his solitary figures pacing balconies, with the defeated slump of a salesman whose pitch had finally failed him. In the courtroom's sterile hush during the deposition where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like accusatory insects, Gloria dismantled his document's relevance with forensic precision, establishing its obsolescence against the ironclad trusts that segregated my assets long before his knowledge could taint them, and as Mark hurled epithets like calculating gold digger from the witness stand in a bid to sway the judges' sympathies, the irony boomeranged spectacularly given his history of relational opportunism that the evidence painted in vivid strokes. Yet the crowning stroke of retribution unfolded post-adjournment when I orchestrated the auction purchase of his repossessed truck through an intermediary shell, stripping it of custom embellishments and returning it to him via anonymous delivery with an interior note quipping that failures navigated with what remained after the extras vanished, a maneuver that compelled a fire sale divestment at a fraction of its value and amplified the humiliation rippling through his professional circles, where whispers of fiscal recklessness eroded the last vestiges of his bravado. The yacht provided the capstone to this orchestrated resurgence, its decks hosting a celebratory charter for Lisa and Carla as tokens of gratitude for their unwavering support in the shadows. The vessel cutting through choppy waters under a canopy of stars that seemed to wink at the reversals below, where conversations flowed with the ease of allies bonded by shared triumphs over underestimation, yet as anchors dropped in a secluded cove, my reflections turned inward to the toll of isolation. That the victories imposed no triumphant return to the split-level house now echoing empty, but a perpetual drift on horizons of my own charting. Dad's letter arrived shoreside, penned in his blocky script with overtures of reconciliation that hinted at mending the familial rift through mutual understanding. But I archived it unopened alongside Mark's final entreaty at a chance gas station encounter where his eyes beseeched a division of spoils to salvage his footing, driving away with the finality. That left him silhouetted against the pumps like a relic of discarded chapters. Regret shadowed them undeniably. Reports from mutual acquaintances depicted Dad's quiet evenings alone with regrets over lost opportunities and Mark's scrabble through entry-level gigs haunted by the echo of his own disdain. Yet the permanence of that remorse hung in ambiguity, a final twist manifesting in an unsolicited inquiry on a peripheral property not from their quarter, but from a dormant corporate rival eyeing expansions that could disrupt my solitude anew. Sailing into the enveloping fog as dawn broke with tentative light, the wealth endured intact yet the heart navigated uncharted currents, pondering whether this fortress of self-reliance healed the fractures or merely walled off deeper connections. The waves murmuring alternatives from forgiveness's distant harbors to the liberation of empty seas, leaving the ultimate verdict to linger in the mind's quiet swells. Had I reclaimed my narrative through unyielding boundaries, or merely exchanged one form of captivity for another's subtle chains, and in your place, would reconciliation's anchor outweigh the freedom of the open tide?